Hey everyone, I'm Jacob. Thanks for joining me for today for this TCWC moment. I just want to come and speak to you about what happens when in the middle of our routine or in the middle of our normal, that all of a sudden there becomes an interruption. I know for me that every morning I get the joy and privilege to wake up, and I have two young boys, and we get them dressed and get them ready to go to school. And just about every morning I take them to school. So we make sure they each have their own car seat. I put them in the appropriate car seat, and then we drive off and I drop them off at the appropriate school. This is routine. We know what to expect. We kind of know what to happen in the morning. We know what time we should get up, what time we need to be out the door to make sure we're on time. And so these have become habits of ours that we've actually come to enjoy and that we kind of even can plan on in the future as well. And we all have these different habits. We all have these different routines in our families or maybe in our personal lives. But my question is, what happens when God interrupts that routine because He has something else planned? And we actually read this in Acts, and then Paul and Silas, as they are actually going from city to city preaching the good news, we actually see this interruption happen. And so I'm going to read to you in Acts chapter 16, starting in verse 9. It says, "That night, Paul had a vision. A man from Macedonia in northern Greece was standing there pleading with him, 'Come over to Macedonia at once.' Having concluded this God's calling to us, and they preached the good news, they left for Macedonia." So immediately here, this was something that was routine to Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas were used to going from city to city to city preaching the good news. And actually they had a lot of people actually that decided to actually take salvation because of what they were sharing. And so in this moment, in this vision, they assumed, I imagine, that all of a sudden they're going to go to Macedonia and the same thing is going to happen. They're going to actually spread the good news. People are going to get saved. And it's going to be a joyous time, but they just feel like the Lord was actually leading to them city. And the Lord was leading to them city, but it was just not what they had kind of expected to come the outcome. So let's read on. So in verse 22, it says, "A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them and stripped them and beaten with wooden rods. They were severely beaten, and they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape, so the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in the stocks." So here immediately, they're going through and they're actually preaching the news, and the crowd becomes upset. And a mob actually forms, and all of a sudden the next thing they know, they're being beaten and they're being thrown into jail. I can imagine at this moment, this was not the idea, and even not the vision that just happened a few verses before, that this was the plan. This was not what they expected. They expected more of, hey, we've gone into city after city, and yeah, some people have disagreed, but more or less people have allowed us to share the good news of Jesus. But here, this was not about the people. It was actually specifically about one person in particular. Let's read on. "Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundation. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off." How do we respond when there's all of a sudden a moment of uncertainty, a moment of this is not normal for us, a moment of we're out of our routine? How do we respond not only to the Lord, but how do we respond to people around us? I think that's so important, especially now as God's doing some great things in our world, but sometimes we just don't understand what's going on not only in the world, but what's going on in our personal life as well, because we're just at a moment of confusion sometimes. And here in this moment, Paul and Silas were at a moment of confusion. They were at a moment of like, this is not what we have planned. We are literally in a jail. It's at midnight, and they begin to actually sing praises and hymns. They begin to worship their Lord. And then we can see an earthquake hit, and all of a sudden, everything fell apart. The doors were open. All the things that were holding them tight, their chains, were falling apart. And then let's read on and see what happens. Once that happened, it said, the jailer actually woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped. So he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, "Stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here." The jailer called the lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling at Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked them, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Man, in that moment of just kind of, man, just chaos, not knowing what the future holds, and in that moment of even there was an opportunity that they thought probably this was an opportunity of freedom, but there was actually something more at stake here. There was actually something bigger when they just took a moment to look around, and all of a sudden the jailer who was ready to kill himself, mainly because he had messed up and made a mistake, and all of a sudden it became urgent that Paul and Silas's message was actually for the jailer. That Paul and Silas's reason for being there was actually for this jailer in particular. It's amazing to me that God is so focused on us individually that He will put people in our path in that right moment at that right time to be exactly what we need in that moment. So my question is, in the circumstance that you may find yourself in and what may ever be happening out of your routine or maybe happening in through your day, have you taken that moment to take a look around and see exactly what God has in store for you? You could be somebody's Paul and Silas. You could be sitting there worshiping with everything you got, and somebody is ready and at the end, but they're ready for someone to help them and just tell them about the good news of salvation. We actually, if you read on in this story, the jailer actually took great care of Paul and Silas after he became saved, and actually all of his family became saved. It was one little spark that really started the fire. And so I just want to encourage you, as the days lie ahead of us, and we have our routines, and all of a sudden our routine gets kind of out of kilter or out of sync, take a moment to step back and see exactly what God has in store for you. See what God is looking and doing around you, and don't forget to look for those people in your path that God's putting you in touch with, that you can be their Paul and Silas. Keep praising the Lord and keep preaching the good news.